So, Mike, I'd love to start off with you. Like I mentioned, you've been organizing in Minneapolis through a lot of the worst things that Minnesota has seen, and also through some incredible things that Minnesotans have done. How is Minnesota a barometer for what we're seeing nationally?
Yes. So welcome to Minnesota, folks. Welcome to Minneapolis. This is my town I've lived in for the past 20 years of my life. We've got some great things happening in Minneapolis. We got the Minnesota Vikings. We got the Wolves. We've got the Mall of America. Who has been to the Mall of America? I have. We got the Lynx as well. We got Prince in the house. 10 years after his death. But we also have had some tragedies happen in Minneapolis, which put us on the national stage. About 6 years ago, brother George Floyd was murdered by the Minneapolis Police Department. And there were people organizing in this city for decades trying to bring attention to police accountability, to trying to bring attention to police violence. Philando Castile, Jamar Clark are just two of the people who have died, two of the black men who have died at the hands of the police that was often overlooked by the national media. When George Floyd happened, it was a national conversation. And I'm proud of the work that I did. I'm proud of the work that we have done in Minneapolis around police accountability. Now, there's a reason why we have that ability to push back in horrible situations. We saw last December and in January, Metro Surge happened in Minneapolis, where they were kidnapping our neighbors, where they killed Alex Preddy, a nurse, and then lied about it, where they killed Miss Good, and then lied about it. That is because of the organizations that we have built here in Minneapolis. In between those two tragedies, we've had a school shooting, Annunciation, where a young boy was killed. My friend, Melissa Hortman, was also killed by an assassination. We have seen horrible tragedies in this city that have pushed us in a national spotlight. But my mom always said, be organized. Stay ready so you don't have to get ready. And I will explain in the next half of this how we have stayed ready in this city so we don't have to get ready. And we've pushed back against the authoritarianism Trump administration, and I'm proud to be from Minneapolis, and thank you for having us here today.
Rhyane, what's going on in the South? What's going on in Alabama?
Everything. So I'll be frank, I'm not here to soften the truth. I'm not here to translate harm into something more palatable. We need accomplices, not just allies. And a big part of my role is connecting the past to the present. What's old is new, what's new is old. Case in point with ICE, those have direct connections to the slave patrols, right? So the Bracero Project, Operation Wetback, Chinese Exclusion Act, the Fugitive Slave Act, the Freedom Papers, you now call it the SAVE Act. Broken treaties and stolen tribal lands, the Monroe Doctrine, Trail of Tears, birthright citizenship. All of these things I've listed are steeped in history of white supremacy and, quite frankly, anti-Blackness. Every single piece of this. And I want us to be thinking, you don't have to answer right now, but just be thinking about it during your time at this conference. Is the Constitution, a 250-year-old document, capable of meeting the moment we're in? We've already seen that the Supreme Court, the John Roberts Supreme Court, has not proven itself to be able to meet this moment, with the exception of Ketanji Brown Jackson. But, so we are seeing our courts being taken over, not just Supreme Court, our state Supreme Courts, North Carolina looking at you. The federal judiciary is under attack. So we cannot depend on the courts to save us. The South is doing Southern things. This is not new. This is a proliferation of these 50-year implementation, successful, might I add, and not in a good way, of the Southern strategy, right? It just shows up differently now. But all of it is connected to the hostile takeover of the South. Most African Americans still reside in the South. Those who stayed during the Black migration, right? I am the direct result of a grandfather who made the choice to leave and go to Detroit, where he felt it was safer, where he got him what he would like to say a good union job at, at General Motors, right? But a portion of my family stayed, and for various reasons. And so we are in a moment where you're seeing an intentional ethnic cleansing. I'm gonna call it what it is. That's what these detention centers are. That most of the detention centers are in states with relationships with the private prison corporations, right? Especially Louisiana. They're trying to build them in Cancer Alley. A lot is going on.
One or two things.
One or two things. Obviously, the continued attacks on our voting rights. You're seeing the proliferation, I can't talk, of state SAVE Acts. Florida and Mississippi did not wait on the federal government or Congress to pass the SAVE Act federally, which failed, thank God. But you're also seeing the proliferation of state voting rights acts. So there's a positive here, right? We are under no illusion that this is going to be hard, long-term work, but we're in it and invested in it as a fight, as a movement, not just a message. And I'll leave it there. I don't want to talk you all to death.
That's a great transition to Ruth. Ruth, you've worked both in the federal and state voting rights acts. What can you talk about? What's going on there?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm the boring lawyer on the panel. But I'm happy you've all had lunch, so at least, we're awake. So I wanted to pick up on two things that Rhyane said. So one of them is the Supreme Court will not save us. I've lost all my cases at the Supreme Court. We had been a little bit involved in the Calais case, so I imagine that'll be another loss. And so I have spent much of my recent career looking to state courts. There are places like North Carolina where the play is to try to get better justices elected. But there are places where the state Supreme Court can deliver rights to people who otherwise can't get them through federal court. So Rhyane mentioned state voting rights acts. I've litigated a couple of cases, one under the Washington Voting Rights Act and two under the New York Voting Rights Act. Most recently, we settled two cases for remedies that we couldn't have got if we did it under the Federal Voting Rights Act. So in the town of Newburgh, they've adopted proportional ranked choice voting that will come in 2027. And in the town of Mount Pleasant, they added 2 seats for the 2 villages that were predominantly Latino, so they will have representation going forward. So we continue to work with people across the places that have, so New York, Colorado, Minnesota here has a voting rights act, Washington, Oregon, California. Maryland, I think, is getting signed today. So, send my notice letters tomorrow. So in places that do have state voting rights acts, that is one thing we're trying to do. But I want to note that I haven't given up on federal court because I think it's not just about winning. So we did a 2.5-week trial with LDF, Michael Pernick, I know, is in the room, down in Oxford, Mississippi, suing the DeSoto County, 5 different sets of the county commission and then 4 other sets of officers. And it probably might be the last Section 2 case under the Federal Voting Rights Act ever, right after Calais comes down. And we knew that it's on the chopping block, but as long as there are ways to get into court, there is a dignity of putting community members on the stand and having the room. They can't jump in and object. They have to listen to everything that's going on and like the lived experiences of the people in the community, and not just like 100 years ago there was this problem. It's like last week the KKK were like dropping flyers in my neighborhood. I think we will continue to do that and make the record, right? In years to come, we want to know all of the things that were going on, and I want them in state courts, but I also think it's important to have them in federal courts. And so that's what we're doing.
At this point, don't wait for me to hand the mic between anyone. But Mike, if you want to start us off, building on things that we are doing now actively that are proactive. What are you doing here in Minneapolis?
Yeah, so I mentioned stay ready so you don't have to get ready. Is that in Minneapolis, we've built a pretty strong coalition of faith, union, and community groups that have been working in coalition for pretty much the past 20 years. And when these crisis moments happen, we all sprung together to actually work in coalition with each other. Another progressive movement that we've had here in the city. Well, let's first talk about the state. The state, we have one of the highest voting percentages in the nation. Continuously, every single election, people in Minnesota get out and vote. But particularly here in Minneapolis and St. Paul and some of the surrounding suburbs, we have a system called, I'm sure you guys know, ranked choice voting, where It gives more choice, more power to people who look like me. We eliminated the primary here, and that gives folks the ability to participate in a general election where all the candidates participate. That has elected the first Somali, the first Hmong, the first trans man, the first trans woman, the first Asian. I go on and on and on and on. But now we have a city council and mayor that actually represents a true majority of the city. So a lot of that actually puts in the civic engagement that we need to actually get folks from sitting on a couch to being civically engaged to now going out in the streets and protesting. You can't get them from the couch to the streets without first understanding what the civic engagement is. And because of systems like ranked choice voting, we can actually give that message to people. So I'm very proud of the work we've done. G. Massey is here. Grace is also here. Folks I've worked with in the trenches trying to expand ranked choice voting to other cities across the state. We have bills right now for local options to make sure other cities get the opportunity to use ranked choice voting. I'm sure we can talk about that more in unison, but long story short, you can't get people from the couch to the streets. We need to be civically engaged. And in Minnesota, we have a well-organized teams around faith, unions, and community groups.
So I would say one of the ways in which, first let me start with the people closest to the pain are closest to the power. And you'll hear me, you'll hear Anisha say that. She couldn't be here, she's at the SOLVE conference. But part of that is having a narrative framework that helps people name what's happening in real time. Like a lot of us live in these spaces, like what is democracy really? It's a very abstract term to people who are just trying to pay their bills, right? Stuff like that. And narrative methodology that centers culture, history, lived experience is important to understand how people make meaning and how that meaning shapes our power, our engagement, right? You've heard me, well, not everyone. I call the SAVE Act the Show Me Your Papers Act. And that's intentional because that is what resonated particularly in Black communities. Because historically, we've always had to prove who we are. Whether it's the freedom papers, whether it's having equitable access to driver's license. We all know passports aren't financially accessible for everyone, right? And we are in a time of surveillance as well, increased surveillance. So you have to also effectively weave those things together in ways that make sense, even in our legislative sessions. Alabama just got a Voting Rights Act introduced for the second time, and we had to effectively communicate that in our communities that don't do this every day. Accountability campaigns. So we have to connect the legislative decisions to real people. All skin folk ain't kinfolk, and we gotta hold them accountable, right? Because they're supposed to represent all of us.
Yeah, can you tell us more what you mean by that?
I normally, I'm gonna use Don Davis as an example. In North Carolina, having elected, I'll say it like this, because Don Davis is my arch nemesis, but having elected officials that representation is not enough, right? It's also about being values aligned, right? I don't want to elect you, for example, to Congress and find out you voted for ICE. I don't want it to find out that you also supported the SAVE Act after we've told you how anti-Black the SAVE Act is. Excuse me, show me your papers. So that's what I mean by not all skin folk or kinfolk. And that goes for all of us in this room. There's this obsession with power some of our electeds have versus the people. There's a difference between being a public servant and being a politician. And people know that, right? We have to sift through the noise in a narrative framework. Meaning making is what Anisha talks about often. Accountability campaigns that center culture, right? You've all seen messaging that really didn't hit, right? It was lacking something, and that's me being tactful. Okay? And let's be clear, white supremacy undergirds all of this. We cannot talk about classism and economic injustice without race. You cannot talk about classism, gender, repro rights without talking about race, because many of us live at the intersection of that.
And so I was just going to add that in order to, so all skin folk and kinfolk, and so how do we get past the looking at someone to talk about issues? And so I'm gonna take you back where I first started. I started on Barack Obama's campaign in 2008, where it was Barack Obama versus Hillary Clinton. I worked in New York City. When I knocked on the door for Barack Obama and that person told me they were voting for Hillary Clinton in a traditional election, guess what I did as a young organizer? That conversation was over. I didn't ask them to vote, didn't talk about the issues I cared about. I did not engage with that person at all because my job was to go to the next door to find as many Barack Obama supporters as possible. You following me? Yeah. In a new election that we have here, we're not just talking about who you're voting for. If you tell me that you're supporting somebody that is my opponent, I now have to get a second and third choice vote. Yeah. So now I have to talk about what issues you care about. Yeah. So it has to break from all skinfolk and kinfolk to talk about what issue, how are we aligned? How are we aligned? And that breaks from the traditional election system to a ranked choice voting or proportional representation system that actually gets to issues that we care about to make sure that the elected officials are actually doing what the folks need them to do.
And I will also add that people are tired of, one, the two-party system, but having to decide between the lesser of two evils. You've probably heard that quite a bit. And we also have the added influence, if you will, of mis and disinformation, AI. And so we are having to also be very clear about messaging and how we distribute that, if you will, into community, because there are a lot of bad actors that are trying to vie for folks' attention and not for anything good. So I think we also need to talk about the mis and disinformation that's also out there, even with ranked choice voting that in DC we're gonna implement in June. And the big piece of that is education. Because the common theme is that it's too hard, right? And it's not. It's just about making sure we're in community, making sure they know what they're doing. And people are smart. So we also need to quit treating people like they're stupid.
Preach.
Okay? They're not. They're just tired of it. Okay? We did a top 5 scenario. Cliff, I'm gonna share what we did at CBC. With BVM, there was a top 5 scenario that everyone that attended the panel got to participate in. We had a QR code, and it was the top 5 female MCs. Now, my person didn't win, but people got to see in real time how it worked. And I think that's important. And instead of just assuming that person's stupid, because people are not. There's a level of disengagement and quite frankly, disillusionment.
Yeah. I wanted to go back to something you had said, Rhyane, about the people closest to the pain and closest to the power. So I have known George Chung for, I don't know, since 2013. And he has sort of helped me to understand the importance of organizers, which sounds insane in this room because you get it. But us little lawyers who go to law school, and I teach lots of law students, learn about how, we won Brown v. Board and the world changed. It didn't. We went to court and we got this thing and it was all done. And it's really hard to impress upon students, although I think there are many of us that are trying to do that, some of them in this room, that litigation is a tool along the way. And so you need organizers in community before you ever go to court. You need them while you're in court, and you need them afterwards. And so to the extent that proportional representation is having a bit of a moment, right? Some of the rich business folks are like, no, there's a problem with democracy. I've got a solution. I urge you to continue to push back and not let people just turn up and say like, oh, you're doing this thing, you're going to do it my way. I think it's really important, and I've done the best that I can do. I'm not in many of those rooms, but when I am in those rooms, the thing I always say is like, you need to fund organizers because you need people on the ground, close to the ground, to work out what actually works in a community. It can't just, be like, hey, here I come from on high to change something. And we've seen when people come from on high to change something, it doesn't succeed. So like, well done. We stopped that. But I think as you go forward, it's just really important that you're able to share what is happening in the communities where you are working and what are the right fixes, and to push back on lawyers who try to tell you to do not what you want.
You have something to... I guess I'll jump in. One thing I think that we hear all the time, especially from so-called moderates and centrists and white moderates, is not yet, wait your turn, don't move too quick, we have more urgent problems, we'll get to it eventually. Why are election systems reforms, why are some of these important things to actually make sure that we're represented in government, not luxuries, but actually important to do now? Why is it something that we can't just get to after we defeat Donald Trump? Why do we need to work on it today?
I will say as a Black woman, like, waiting is a luxury I don't have, right? I operate in the now, and I think I can safely say that's kind of been the environment. I've always been in the South. What does that mean to wait? Like, stop telling us to wait our turn. We've historically had to hear that, and it's condescending at best, and that's me being nice. But we have to radically reimagine what we want our country to be. This is why I asked you all: is the current Constitution, does it have the ability to meet this moment? Right? This administration's doing what it wants to do. We need to match energy and think about what we want as a community, as people. And so waiting doesn't even factor. I don't know what that means.
I do think that there's some movement from my white moderate friends towards understanding the urgency, and here's why. I mentioned Philando Castile and Jamar Clark, and the organizers that were saying over and over again that we needed police accountability. Mm-hmm. A lot of that didn't really take effect. People didn't really feel it until George Floyd was killed.
Yeah.
And even then, some of my white moderates would say, well, maybe he shouldn't have had it then, finding little things to nag about.
Yeah.
And we were saying, activists, Black activists in the community, the police are lying, they cover up things, the Minneapolis police is horrible. It took the murder of Alex Petty and Rhyane Good for a lot of white moderates to now understand that the government lies when they kill us.
Yes. Yes.
Make sure that's on camera. And so I do think that there's a movement towards directly impacted people. And sometimes you have to be directly impacted for folks to actually notice what the heck is going on. And I'm not going to curse. And Donald Trump just doesn't care anymore. He's coming after everybody. Alex Petty was an ICU nurse.
Yeah.
And they pretended like he was, they just lied from the highest levels of government. They just lied on his name. And we have seen it in the Black community. This is not new to us. We know that the police lie after killing us. And because it's now affecting white moderates, I think that they're more awake, more woke, if you will. And I do think change is coming more faster than I thought 2 years ago.
Yeah, and on the why not to wait, many of the people in this room work at the local level, and I think that's a place where you can make a lot of change, right? There's all of this, let's go on Truth Social and say something national, while you're out there making amazing changes locally and then sort of showing that as a proof of concept to work its way up. Those rich folk in the boardrooms I talked about before, they're very much like, I'm gonna change Congress. But you know what's great? Like, change the local police department, right? Like, change the local school board. That has a very meaningful impact on people's lives, even when all the rest is happening.
Also, believe people when they tell you something's going to go down the first time. Believe Black people. Believe Black women. Okay? And believe directly impacted communities. Because when they come for one of us, they come for all of us. It shouldn't have, and I agree with you, it shouldn't have, in your previous statement, it shouldn't have taken that either for Rhyane Good to die, for people to care. This man has made it his point to rob all of us of our humanity, right? Once you dehumanize a whole community, it's much easier to be cavalier about their treatment, right? But I will also add, believe us when we tell you some stuff is gonna go down. Almost. There's a camera. Okay. And it's not hyperbole. Like, we're all going to be impacted by this. And so I just wanted to lift that up because it shouldn't have taken Rhyane Good getting shot for people to be like, oh, and I'm like, because you thought it was only impacting a certain group of people.
So this makes a real difference. People aren't dumb and can understand it. It has a real positive impact on people's everyday lives, both in terms of government and what the government can do. So how do we make it happen? How do we turn this from a good idea that we all agree with and think, that's interesting, we should do that, into something that we are mobilizing community to actually do? What are the steps we got to take to get there?
I think y'all are doing great work, movement, more equitable democracy. In Minneapolis, we started on the ground level, working, talking to folks. It actually really has to be a grassroots movement, not a top-down movement. So acknowledging that there's flaws in the electoral system as it exists. Some people might not know that there's other options. Like the traditional model is not the only way to go. So explaining to them the ranked choice voting model or proportional representation. And to the sister to my left, I'm sorry, I forgot your name. Rhyane. The best MC, we did that all the time in Minneapolis to explain ranked choice voting. It is easy once you actually sit down with the paper. If you're going in blind, it's going to be a new ballot. But if you explain it first, name your favorite park, name your favorite MC, what's your favorite slice of pizza? We did all sorts of events trying to get people to understand the easiness of ranked choice voting. And I got people to understand it and make a grassroots movement to actually change the traditional election system.
Yeah.
I've been obsessed with how do we include PRCV in the state VRAs and
VRAs?
State Voting Rights Act. I'm sorry, I talk in acronyms sometimes. I apologize because I'm in it. But in the South, we don't have the luxury of robust ballot initiative systems with some exceptions, Florida being one of those. And so I think we're in a unique position to really gather that Southern data that's so needed with a Black liberatory lens as well. That doesn't often get that story often gets lost in translation in the current system, hence all the gerrymandering of the maps, right? And also making sure we're going out in community and messaging and framing this as a movement, not just something to present to somebody in the legislature. And research is also key to this because there's really not a lot out there. And so we're at a great point in time where we can also talk to our communities about electoral reform, and it's not a one-size-fits-all model either, and being clear about that and upfront. But it leads to these other conversations, right? Like it leads to how do we change how we finance our campaigns? How do we ballot design, right? Like just stuff like that. Once you start talking to people, it just kind of becomes this larger education tool, because right now we are in the South, we don't have the luxury of maybe ballot initiating a lot of this, so we have to come at it from a narrative framework as well, while also protecting voting rights, because we're doing multiple things at once, but also presenting people with like options. We don't have to do the winner-take-all model. We've changed the Supreme Court 7 times, and you'd be amazed at how most people don't know that, to either shrink it or make it larger.
Yeah, I in the work that I have done, I have found the most effective messengers to start explaining, because I'm not usually explaining to hundreds of people. I'm usually in a room with like 6 people being like, here's the thing, maybe. And the most effective messages have been people who have already done it. So like Jenny Lee zoomed in to my community out on Long Island to say, hey, we did this thing in Portland and this is why we did it and this is how we did it. And I had been meeting with them for years beforehand. And after that, they were like, we want that. And so then I was like, oh, okay. So I got, my folk in Newburgh to talk to my other folk. And that's the way that I have found, maybe because I'm uniquely bad at explaining things simply, but to the extent you can be resources to each other. And part of it is it's not like, how do I count up the numbers and the ballots and the stuff, but it's like, what was happening in your community and why did you want to make a change and what has happened since you did that? I feel like I just want to keep collecting all of you to help with everybody else around. I guess the other thing I will say is if you do want to threaten a lawsuit, here I am. Look me up. Happy to help. That can also, nothing focuses the mind like having an impending deposition where you have to speak under oath. Yeah.
And, I would agree with that as well. I worked in New York City trying to pass it. Who passed it and did a great job at it. Give it up for New York City who passed ranked choice voting. Me and Jean went down to Memphis where they were fighting for ranked choice voting. Didn't quite get it, but we were fighting in Memphis. I just did a testimony in Hawaii who's looking at it as well. So there's actually people in this room that are willing to explain the messages of like what has happened in Minneapolis, how successful it is. My information is here. I would be happy to travel to help or zoom in to like talk about the benefits of ranked choice voting. But it's also that a thin line to walk where we want to explain how it's worked in every city successfully, but also not because it worked here, it might not work there. And also it's a juggle of saying, well, you did it in Minneapolis, what's about Memphis? So we have to have to explain enough to show that it's worked, but not explain enough to be like we're fortunate from another city.
So there's a couple funders in the room, I think. I won't ask them to raise their hands, but
Please do.
you can. And there's a few on the camera probably watching. So let's say they're convinced, they're persuaded. This is a good thing. We should do it. Get me a campaign plan so we can win in 18 months, and I'll fund you. And if you can't do something like you're in the South, like we don't really have time for you. It's a 10-year plan. We can't fund that. Why should funders start funding this work even if it is beyond an 18-month campaign plan? How do we get to that win that they really want to see on the scoreboard?
It's called transformational relationships. You don't want to be in a community operating like, all right, goodbye, this was a failure. Like a lot of politicians do that. They'll show up in October asking you to support them, and they haven't said one word to you ever. And so we have to operate from a standpoint of being in community and really building and allowing groups already doing the work to do what they know how to do, right? Because when you swoop in like that, it comes off as extractive, and it doesn't really ingratiate you to the communities that are there that have been doing it and really, really need the support.
Yeah, on the timeline. So I was just out in Colorado. There is an amazing article from the Colorado Times Recorder called Red Print about the conservative forces that are giving out 10-year grants to make community change, right? Yeah. They're not stupid. Yeah. They know how to make change. You don't make it in year 1 or year 2. You build and you build and you build, and then you make a change, and then you stick around and you win and you stay. So the first thing is we should be doing 10-year grants. Let's do that. What's my second point? No, I've forgotten. That's it.
Come back when you find it.
So all of these changes are going to take some time. So when you switch to ranked choice voting, it's not just changing the system, but it's also the mindset around voting. Where I mentioned how it's different for the voter, because now the voter gets a different choice. Where it's just like, okay, well, you're not my first choice. Let's talk about the issues. Different for the voter. The candidates got to do a little bit different. Like they got to think about how to work the messaging. But then after you get elected, that person now has a true majority of 50 plus 1%. And so that person is now governing with not just focusing on its base. So what I would say to funders, it fundamentally changes how our system operates just by changing a simple ballot to ranked choice voting fundamentally changes not only how the voter interprets it, how the candidate actually campaigns, but once that candidate's in office, he now represents a true majority of his constituents.
Yeah, can I add on to that? So I think it's really important to keep the connection to policy in mind, because I'm always like, well, these are like systems we can use. But the community is like, we have a problem with our school board, or we have a problem with our, police, or whatever they have. And to always be clear that the reason we're doing any of this is to get to the next thing. So it's like, once you get your people elected, have the list of demands ready. These are all the policies that you need to change. And this is how we need to hold you accountable. And if not, we're going to kick you out. Rather than just as you say, we got the change, bye. Yeah, you got to stick around.
And in the traditional system, in that August primary that we typically had, those folks who voted, who got to narrow the system, who got to narrow to 2, so there's 5 people running. People who vote in the August primary are typically old, rich, white people, typically moderate. Those folks got to narrow the system down to 2 people. And then in November, where people like us show up and vote, people who are minority and look like us, women, they've already narrowed it down to their 2 choices. We blew up that system in Minneapolis, where now we only have one election, where everybody shows up in November. And that fundamentally changes how our system operates. So we're getting people more diverse elected, and when they get in, they want to represent a true majority.
I'm going to add one more thing, which is, sorry.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
On that California system, once again, the funders were super into that for a while. And I remember saying to one of them, I was like, there's like no political science support for that working. They're like, really? Send me the paper. And I was like, is this a thing we do now? So to the extent you have somebody, you need to like send them a paper. I see Zoli is here in the room. He probably wrote half the papers. There are people to reach out to push back and say, the reason I don't want to do this, it's not just like my vibes are off. It's like, this will not work and I can show you why.
So, other than money and resources, what is missing that y'all could use to help this work happen more? What do you need to help you in the work that you're already doing? You don't need a new organization to come in, I'm assuming. You don't need someone else telling you what to do. What do you need? What would help you, Rhyane, in Alabama?
Besides money?
Besides, which
That's a
you should
huge
give
one.
them money.
Funding is a huge one, but also just, I would say cultural competence sits with me in every space that I'm in, acknowledging the regional differences. I think of Louisiana. North and South Louisiana are very different, but 9 times out of 10, the funding goes right down to where New Orleans is. We love New Orleans. But a lot of Louisiana is very rural, maybe having some rural support, because a lot of those major metropolitan areas in the South, they're not necessarily the best indicators of how the state will perform, if you will, to not use traditional electoral language. I'm trying to break that. But there's Atlanta, then there's Georgia. There's New Orleans, then there's Louisiana. And we have to be cognizant of that. If I'm in Florida, language access is important all over the country. But also you have Haitian Creole, you have Brazilian Portuguese emerging, Spanish. Like, we are fighting to just have support to be able to continue to get voter registration forms in those languages. Now it's English only, and that was what the governor was trying to push, right? So there's a whole swath of things I can think of, but like cultural competence, regional acknowledgement. We have strong tribal communities in much of the South, quiet as it's kept, and making sure everyone has equitable access. Like, it's just, the money's not just so concentrated in one area because you believe it's easier.
Ruth, is there anything that you need, or do you have it all?
I definitely don't have it all. But what I need is mostly people in this room, right? So I need you, MED, to keep finding more and more people across the country who are interested in reform. Because, you know, little white Ruth from Australia turns up, hey guys, who wants to talk about election reform? Doesn't work out so well. But meeting with people, so I think having convenings like these and connections, there's lots of people from the civil rights groups in this room, and they all have incredible talent in lots of areas. So I think maintaining a connection. The other thing that I just don't know what my recommendation is, but it has become apparent to me that just like the fight, the attack on unions over, 50, 100 years has left a real democratic deficit. I didn't even realize that Colorado, triple blue, is a right to work state. Like, what's up with that? So I don't know how to do it, but I think it's really important to have organizing across different sectors so that we're sort of building power together, not just like, we're out here doing this one thing by ourselves. Yeah.
I think more of these convenings are also important for us to make connections across different sections of the movement, would also help us actually with the movement itself.
I'll add that I'm on the Solve Leadership Council, and one of the most effective things that we did to engage communities was have Southern roadshows and really talk to not just groups on the ground, but people who were just interested. And we came away with some incredible stories that people shared, and it helps inform how we move in community, hearing that real-time feedback.
Awesome, thank you. We've got about 10 minutes left. I wanna ask you to do something that we don't often do in the space, which is to talk about how good things could be. I want you to imagine that over the next 5 years, we start building the movement that we all think we need to see, and then movement continues. And then it's now the year 2040. What could happen? When we're not just doing harm reduction, when we have worked to build something new, what do you want the United States to look like? What do you want Minnesota to look like?
We have a guaranteed income program to make sure that no one lived in poverty in this country. We completely eliminate poverty. We have free childcare for folks who need it the most, that they can actually go to work without taking care of their children. We make sure that there's a union for every single worker that's actually doing great work across the country. We raise the minimum wage to actually a living wage. We follow through on our commitment to make sure that the country accepts every single person, and make sure that racial justice and climate justice are also focused of our national level. There's so many things. I have so much hope for this country that I think after the Donald Trump administration that I'm optimistic that we can achieve those goals.
I would say, ooh, how old will I be? Will I be 80? Yes, 36. I'll be very young. I would say I want to see all the state VRAs have passed, even strengthened. I want Black women to survive childbirth and have the care that they deserve. I want our rural hospitals reopened. I want people to be able to afford to live in the states where their families are and their communities are. I want gerrymandering to be illegal. An expanded Supreme Court with term limits. Okay, that's just a few things.
Okay, I want all of that. And then also, no, I think that in addition to state voting rights acts, even better is just mandates to change the law. So one simple thing is that, the time when you hold your elections massively influences who will turn out, and then that influences governance outcomes. And so California just changed it. They were like, yep, let's have everybody vote in November of on years. And it has huge representational effects rather than us having to sue one by one and go somewhere and so on. So to the extent there are places that when the change happens, it's not just a cause of action, but it's like just blanket policy, right? Let's just have proportional representation for all those at-large councils. Let's just switch it over. To the extent we can do that at the state level, and to any extent at the federal level. I would love to not have to keep on doing these partisan gerrymandering lawsuits that I've been doing for years. I've done them federally, I've done them in states. I'm like, you tried to get independent commissions. If you just set up a system of proportional representation, mixed member, whatever it is, right? Then gerrymandering is out of the picture and we're into all of the policies that Mike was talking about. And that's where we should be. I want to be like obsolete. That would be nice.
I want everyone in the room to hold on to all of that and recognize that that is not utopian. That is actually pragmatic and possible. Change feels impossible until it isn't.
Yeah.
If you go back in time to 10 years before the abolition of slavery, it felt like something that would never happen. You go back to 1960, and the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act and the Immigration Act felt truly unattainable. In 2007, during the Democratic primary, Hillary Clinton said that she thought marriage was between one man and one woman. And then look what happens over the course of just 5 years. This stuff can be real if we can have long-term thinking. I'm not supposed to do this, but I want to just check in real quick to see if anyone has a question for this amazing panel before we
Or a comment. We'll
let it
take
go.
comments. Just share your thoughts.
Well, yeah.
We don't know
share,
everything.
Share a comment, share a thought.
No question.
Share something that you want folks to see. Please.
Hi, my name is Janelle Austin, and I am with Rise and Remember at George Floyd Square here in Minneapolis.
Thank you, sister. Appreciate your work.
Yeah, thank you.
Please go to George Floyd Square if you haven't. Thank you. I really appreciate you.
Yes, you're all welcome. So one of the things that I've been wrestling with recently is this idea that like everyone's looking at Minneapolis and everything that we did and how can we help mobilize a nation to organize. But what is not introduced in that conversation is that it came with death and or unimaginable loss. So to what extent can we get people to organize across the country before the death or the unimaginable loss happens? Or does it take that? Does it take Alex Preddy? Does it take Rhyane Good? Does it take George Floyd, Jamar Clark, Philando Castile, Trayvon Martin, Emmett Till? Like, does it take that for people to say we need to get organized? Or is there another route without the death and the unimaginable loss?
I just want everybody in the room to just sit with that question. Just sit with it. Now, I don't have an answer for you, sister, but thank you for your hard work. Don't make me cry up here. But thank you for your hard work, the agonizing work that you've put in at George Floyd Square. I remember as a kid, I often asked my mom always said, well, the civil rights movement, it took the blood of Dr. King and Malcolm X to get there. And as a kid, I never understood, like, why did it take people to die? The blood of Jesus Christ had to forgive. So why did it take people to die for it to be a reckoning in the country? And it took me to now be an adult to realize what my mom always told me as a kid about those civil rights leaders that died. And I will put George Floyd right next to them as well. I don't know. I don't have the answer to that question. I hope there's a day in this country where we don't have to ask that and there's movements without death. But right now, I'm not sure if we're at that point in our country. Rhyane, you got any more hope to give us with that? I don't want to.
I'm with you. I don't know, because it's so steeped in this nation's fabric. But I will say that I in the 17 years now that I've been, because I've done electoral work as well, I had to figure out where my joy is in the midst of it all. And I think about my grandmother's generation who had, let's be real, Jim Crow was fascism. It was regional. They've had to figure out where their hope and their joy was to be in those conditions. And I don't want to sit here and act like I have the answers, but I think one of the things my colleagues and I have thought about is how do we also center our wellness, our support, our groups. So it's not just mutual aid, right? It's just how are we being still and resting and finding some sort of joy somewhere. And that may not be helpful, but that's the way in which I've had to persist in these moments. But I don't have an answer. I struggle even thinking of a world without racism, to be honest with you, sometimes. And I hope we get there. But I also know the realities of what this country is. It shouldn't have to take our folks dying for change to happen. It shouldn't have, but also it shouldn't have taken Rhyane dying for white folks to, this does impact all of us, right? It shouldn't have taken that, but I also don't begrudge people. Come to the space how you feel like you need to. Also ask for help. Like if you're struggling, you gotta ask for help. Like you can't pour from an empty cup, not to sound cliche. Find your care community too, right? Because this is heavy work.
Really humbled to be with all of you. Heather, we got one more question out there? If not, I think that's a great spot to end it on. Take care of yourselves and take care of each other.
Thank y'all.
Hey, if you made it to the end of the video, you must have liked what you saw. So you should head over to our website, equitabledemocracy.org, so you can sign up for our mailing list and stay up to date on all the new things we're working on. Also, if you want to head back to our YouTube channel, you can listen to our award-winning podcast, watch riveting documentaries, or check out new content just like this.